There's something deeply unsettling to the average man when a woman chooses stillness over reaction, especially in moments of tension, when anger is expected, when confrontation is presumed, when the emotional chaos is almost staged. The one thing he is least prepared for is calm. Not the kind of calm that suppresses emotion out of fear, but the calm that is rooted in self. This kind of calm is not weakness. It's not submission. It is clarity in motion. And for many men, it is profoundly disarming. Psychologically, we are conditioned to anticipate emotional symmetry in conflict. You raise your voice, I raise mine. You accuse, I defend. You storm out, I chase. This is the dance most people learn, not because it's functional, but because it's familiar. So when a woman refuses to play that game, when she stands still while others flail, when she observes rather than reacts, it's a break in the expected pattern. That break doesn't just confuse, it reveals. It holds up a mirror. It says, I'm not participating in dysfunction today. And in doing so, it forces the man to confront his own. Men, particularly those unaccustomed to emotionally regulated women, will find this kind of presence deeply confronting. They may perceive it as arrogance. They may try to provoke a reaction to regain control. But what they're really responding to is the sudden awareness that they are no longer directing the emotional tempo. The woman's inner stability creates a dissonance, a reminder that power doesn't always look like volume or aggression. Sometimes it looks like composure. Now, composure is not the absence of emotion, it's the integration of emotion. And this distinction is important because a woman who is calm is not necessarily unaffected. She feels, but she feels without being ruled. She sees what's happening, but she doesn't become what's happening. That's a level of sovereignty most people never reach. And when a man sees it, whether consciously or not, he is forced to question his own internal world. Why am I spiraling while she remains steady? What does she know that I don't? That internal questioning, if he's wise, becomes a path to growth. If he's not, it becomes a trigger for deeper projection. But either way, the effect is the saming. The mental structure that once assumed control begins to melt. Not because she dominated him, but because she removed herself from the emotional battlefield altogether. This is where the deeper philosophy comes into play. When a person no longer needs to be right to feel whole, they become psychologically untouchable. And many men are not prepared for that kind of woman. Not because she's difficult, but because she's whole. Most men are not taught how to regulate their emotions. They're taught how to suppress or discharge them. So when a woman can hold discomfort without unraveling, without collapsing into panic or rage, it disrupts that entire blueprint. It reveals the possibility of internal mastery. And that revelation can either inspire transformation or provoke resistance. But in both cases, it leaves an impression. Some women mistake this approach for being emotionless or cold. It's not. It's the result of inner work. Emotional discipline developed through pain, healing, and self-respect. It's the realization that not every moment requires reaction, and not every confrontation deserves access to your nervous system. And when you operate from that space, you're no longer offering your emotions as currency in someone else's chaos. You're preserving your energy for clarity, not for combat. This is why men melt mentally when you stay calm in chaos, because it reveals everything they've hidden. It exposes the fragility beneath the aggression. It shows the fear behind the dominance. And most importantly, it communicates that you cannot be manipulated by volume, urgency, or fear. And here's the deeper truthing: when you remain calm, it's not just a psychological maneuver, it's a spiritual one. You are showing that peace is an internal decision, not an external condition. You are embodying the reality that self-respect doesn't scream, it simply doesn't engage with nonsense. That kind of energy isn't just powerful, it's transformative. So the next time you're tempted to match someone's chaos, remember what stillness actually says. Yeah, I have nothing to prove and nothing to lose by walking away. And that, more than any emotional outburst, will shake a man to his core. There's a subtle but profound shift in power when a woman begins holding boundaries, not as a reaction, not out of anger, not as a performance, but simply as a fact, without pleading, without long-winded justifications, without guilt. It sends a message louder than any speeching. I know who I am, and I will not abandon myself for connection. That kind of quiet certainty dismantles any man's psychological grip faster than confrontation ever could. Most men are used to boundaries coming with friction, resentment, emotionality, the need for approval. They've been trained culturally and relationally to believe that if they push hard enough, the line will move. And often it does. Not because the boundary wasn't real, but because it wasn't fully owned. A boundary you explain to be accepted is not a boundary. It's a request for permission. And when you need someone else's validation to maintain it, it's no longer yours. It's rented, not rooted. So when a man meets a woman who doesn't explain her boundary, but simply lives at you, he has two choices: grow or go. Because in that moment, he's not just dealing with a decision. He's dealing with a woman who has emotional infrastructure. That shakes his internal system. It forces a confrontation with his own entitlement. And if he's emotionally immature, he'll experience her boundary not as a neutral stance, but as a personal rejection. But here's the psychological truth. Your boundary isn't about him. It's about your relationship with yourself. And that's what makes it so powerful. A woman who doesn't feel the need to justify why she won't tolerate disrespect is a woman who has stopped negotiating with her worth. She's no longer trying to be like, she's trying to be aligned. That shift is seismic. It's the transition from performing value to embodying it. Let's go deeper. Philosophically, boundaries are an existential declaration. They say, this is where I ended, and you begin. And that definition of self is the cornerstone of any healthy identity. When you don't have boundaries, you don't really have a self. You have a shape that morphs in response to others. You become adaptive, agreeable, accommodating. Not out of choice, but out of fear. The fear of being left, the fear of not being enough. But ironically, when you erase your boundaries to avoid rejection, you end up rejecting yourself, and that's a far more dangerous betrayal. Men can sense when a woman has no boundary, not always consciously, but viscerally. It shows up in how easily you say yes when you mean no. It shows up in how you avoid silence by over-explaining. It shows up in how you apologize for taking up space. And if a man is manipulative, he will use this to his advantage. He will test the edges of your self-respect to see where you wobble. But if a man is healthy, he will honor those boundaries, even if they inconvenience him, especially if they inconvenience him. And this is the moment of truth. Because when a man respects your boundaries, not because he has to, but because he only chooses to, that's when you know you're dealing with someone who's done the inner work. But the only way to attract that is by refusing to entertain the ones who won't. That's the evolutionary path. You cannot elevate your experience while tolerating what contradicts your standards. Now, here's the hard part. Holding a boundary will often make people uncomfortable, call you selfish. Some will try to guilt you. Some will disappear, and that's okay. That discomfort isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's often a sign you're doing something right. Because the moment you stop abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable, you reclaim your center. And from that place, you operate with clarity, not confusion. The woman who holds a boundary without explaining it rewrites the dynamic. She's no longer trying to be good girl, the agreeable partner, the one who bends. She becomes something else, something far more powerful, a mirror. And not everyone can stand to look into a mirror that reflects their limits. So, if you're wondering how to make a man melt mentally, don't raise your voice. Raise your standard. Hold your line. Stay rooted, not in punishment, not in pride, but in peace. Because a woman who doesn't justify her boundaries has already done the deepest work. She's no longer asking for respect. She's requiring it through her presence alone. And that is the kind of woman who cannot be shaken. One of the most profound psychological disruptions you can create in a man's mind is not in what you say, but in what you don't. And nothing penetrates deeper than when you simply walk away, without a fight, without fanfare, without trying to explain your worth to someone who chose to overlook it. Because when you do that, you're not just ending a relationship, you're withdrawing your energy and to someone who has become accustomed to feeding off of it. Your attention, your reactions, affected, your need to be understood, that absence is a form of accountability they cannot escape. Let's be clear here. Walking away doesn't mean you've stopped caring. In fact, it often means you cared deeply, perhaps too deeply, for too long. It means you gave chances, had conversations, offered grace. But at some point, caring turns into self-abandonment, And continuing to engage with someone who consistently violates your peace begins to cost you more than the relationship is worth. So when a woman finally decides to walk, not out of emotion, but out of clarity, what she's really doing is refusing to mortgage her future for someone else's potential. And this is where the psychological fracture occurs. Because most men, especially those who rely on dominance or emotional inconsistency to maintain power, never expect her to leave without needing to be heard one last time. They anticipate the pleading, the attempts at closure, the need for validation. But when she simply exits, when the calls aren't returned, the texts aren't answered, when her silence replaces her explanations, it sends a different kind of message. You're no longer entitled to access me. What makes this so powerful isn't just the act of leaving, it's how it's done. When you walk away without rage or revenge, you signal that your self-worth no longer depends on being seen by someone who refused to understand you. And that unbothered detachment is unsettling. It forces reflection, because now there's no one left to argue with. There's no drama to distract from the loss. There's just silence. And for someone who used emotional chaos as a weapon, that silence becomes deafening. Philosophically, this is about reclaiming authorship over your story. There's a principle in psychology that says you can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. And that includes emotional environments built on manipulation, inconsistency, or neglect. So walking away isn't just leaving a relationship, it's exiting a narrative that kept you small. And by doing so, you force the other person to either evolve or remain in their dysfunction alone. This is where many women hesitate. The idea of walking away without closure can feel unbearable. But here's a deeper truth. Closure is rarely something they give you. It's something you create within yourself. It comes when you stop seeking understanding from someone incapable of giving it, and instead recognize that their inability to value you has nothing to do with your value. That's the mental shift. That's when you stop needing to be understood and start choosing to be free. And yes, it will be noticed. He may not admit it. He may not say anything at all. But it will register the absence of your energy, the emotional stability you provided, the empathy you gave, the patience you extended. That vacuum cannot be filled quickly. And if he ever does reflect, it won't be because you convinced him. It will be because you left him with the one thing that always speaks louder than words: distance. Now, let's bring this back to the broader psychological framework. A woman who walks away without a scene is a woman who has transcended the need to win a battle. She's not trying to prove she's right. She's not trying to punish. She's simply done negotiating her peace. And that level of self-command is rare. It's the difference between reacting and deciding, between collapsing and rising. And it's what sets her apart from every version of herself that used to stay hoping something would change. So if you ever find yourself in a place where walking away feels impossible, ask yourself this: what am I really afraid of losing? The person or the illusion of what they could have been? Because the moment you can tell the truth about that is the moment you can leave without needing a round of applause for doing so. Some endings don't come with closure. Some come with silence and self-respect. And when you choose that, when you walk away without needing to be chased, you stop being an option in someone else's chaos and become the standard for your own peace.